Good evening, friends. Welcome to the Pendragon Foundation's YouTube channel and out on Twitter too. My name's Nathan Hood. I'm the chairman of the foundation, and today we have an absolutely great stream for you, or at least it's going to be a fun one because we're at the end of the year. It's been a busy year, a hectic year. It's been a really strong year for Pendragon. We launched officially this year, and we wanted to do something a bit fun, a bit celebratory as we move towards the end of the year and move into 2026. And it's a topic which is something I've thought about a lot over the years, and many of you will probably have done so as well. It is strategy and tactics in the Lord of the Rings, particularly looking at Rohan and Isengard in this episode. I'll give a little bit of background why I wanted to do this topic. When I was young, I remember watching on television for the first time a show called Time Commanders. Do any of you remember Time Commanders at all? It was on the BBC, and essentially you had a presenter with two sets of contestants, and each set of contestants was kind of standing up on a balcony, and below them was a giant tactics board, really big, and they would be able to push around with a big stick different units, blocks representing units in a battlefield. And when they did so, when they kind of ordered where a unit should go, somebody on a computer was inputting these commands, and they were then kind of put into the, I think it was the Rome Total War engine or the Medieval 2 Total War engine, and then shown on a big screen. So you could kind of see in real time your commands dictating what was happening in the battle. And so the two contestants would go up against each other, and they would try and do different historical battles, such as the Battle of Hastings. And so, the pitch would be you're acting as if you were Harold Godwin's son. Can you defeat William of Normandy? And if you're the side, you're William of Normandy, can you fulfill what happened in history and defeat the Saxons once again? And they did this with a number of different battles, Agincourt, for example. And so this was really captivating to me as a young boy who read history, particularly the horrible history books, loved going to see castles and medieval fairs and so on, and watching this show, and this idea that you could actually command various armies and simulate what it would be like to be a commander, and perhaps rewrite history, correct history, as it were, make the right tactical decisions in those moments, was really enthralling. A bit older, I got the chance to play various video games. There's many Lord of the Rings games I played. Some of you might remember the PlayStation 2 Towers and Return of the King, where you get to be the heroes and fight through the various battles. But the one that really captured me was Rome Total War and Medieval Total War, whereas watching Time Commanders, you're watching people input, deliver the commands, and people are then inputting them for them. You could input them directly. And this worked on two levels. You could be working on a tactical level in a battle, commanding your troops around the field, real time, and that was very exciting. So you could play the Battle of Hastings, as it were, in real time. But you could also do it on a strategic level, so overseeing an entire campaign and moving your armies around the map, working out where you should go, how you should approach invading another land, another people, and conquering them, and eventually trying to conquer the whole of the map. So being able to do these two things was exhilarating, because you could pretend that you're Attila the Hun or Julius Caesar or Hannibal of Carthage and see the scenarios that they were in and try and make your own decisions, and in some sense relive those moments and see how your mind would have been tested by it, whether you would have succeeded in such a situation. Of course, there are a number of differences, and it's not the same as being in a real campaign with real battles, but for a teenager who loved history, it was absolutely fantastic. And this fed into playing other games, tabletop games. I used to play the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game by Games Workshop. I know a number of you play Warhammer, whether that be the Warhammer Total War or the Warhammer Tabletop and other tabletop games. And again, you get to simulate those experiences where you're commanding an army and seeing, okay, how would I go about this? What tactics would I use to overcome an opponent? Could I have done better than King Theoden did, for example, or Saruman in the War of the Ring, and so on. So this sort of imaginative space is somewhere that I've been for a long time, and so I kind of then wanted to bring this into this channel and maybe assessing a couple of historical or fictional situations and seeing, okay, what were the tactics, what were the strategies, and how could they be improved, or what were the possibilities in these situations. And because we're not quite at New Year's Eve, but because we're nearly there, and I wanted to do something a bit of fun to see us into the new year, I thought, let's do Tolkien, because Tolkien, there's tons of battles, there's great military campaigns run by Sauron and Saruman, there's tactics within battles and choices that are made that determine the history of what happens. And so we can kind of get into it by comparing it with real life historical events as well. And there's one bit in particular in the Lord of the Rings film, and I'm gonna focus on the film here primarily, not the books, just for ease of visual reference and so on. But I do appreciate that the books have a slightly more stronger strategic and tactical kind of understanding. But there's one bit in the film which has always captivated me. I want to play to you now, and then you'll see where I'm coming from with this stream. So let me get my headphones on to make sure this works. Let me remove this. And you'll need to let me know if you can't hear this, otherwise I'll assume you can. So this is in the Two Towers, and it's just after Theoden has been kind of freed from his mind being possessed or dulled and despair by Gandalf. So he's finally awake to the situation.
They had no warning. They were unarmed. Now the wild men are moving through the Westfold, burning as they go. Rick Cotton Tree.
Where is Mama?
This is but a taste of the terror that Saruman will unleash. All the more potent she is driven mad by fear of Sauron.
So a word on this. The situation that we've got here is that while Theoden has been under the spell of Grima Wormtongue and Saruman and unable to prepare defenses appropriately, with the fall of his son at the Fords of Isen, the last resistance to Saruman has been broken, and the wild men, the Dundlings, are causing havoc. They're just going from town to town, which is pretty defenseless, and just burning, looting, pillaging. They're like, and this was quite common in medieval warfare for there to be a lot of raiding. Particularly, actually, interesting. I was reading about this the other day, because castles were so strong and difficult to take, difficult to do attack if you didn't have enough resources and a big enough army and time and money and so on. If you can't afford that, well, raiding is much easier, and so often armies would just go into another territory and just raid, and until they could draw out the enemy for maybe a pitched battle. This pleased most of the people involved, especially if there were mercenaries involved, because they got to keep a lot of the loot, and it was absolutely destructive to the opposition. And if they could not resist, they would have to come to terms eventually, because there was a situation that would not be sustainable for them. They would lose the support of their own people if this continued, and it's also loss of the land that they've got, the produce that's produced from it, the taxation, etc. So you can't allow raiding to go on forever. In this case, it's slightly different, because we know that Saruman, he's not fighting a conventional war. Most wars, at least in the medieval period, are really about maybe gaining territory or gaining influence over another power, they're not about the wholesale destruction of the opposition. They're not genocidal typically. This is not the case here. Saruman wants to destroy Rohan. He talks about the end of the world of men, and whether that means absolutely wiping out every last man, woman, and child in Rohan, or doing it to most of it and enslaving the rest, it isn't exactly clear. But we're talking on those terms. It's not going to be... Rohan's not going to exist as a people anymore. And Gandalf himself is worried that Rohan will not survive the ensuing conflict. So this is different from most situations. And so this raiding is more than just... it's more than just your typical raiding in a medieval war where one army's kind of causing trouble in another's territory. This is meant to be part of an extermination of the people of Rohan. Let us get back to it.
Ride out and meet him head on. Draw him away from your women and children. You must fight.
You have 2,000 good men riding north as we speak. Éomer is loyal to you. His men will return and fight for their king.
They will be 300 leagues from here by now.
So let's just focus in on this is the thing that really draws me in here, right? Gandalf and Aragorn are both saying to Theoden, don't hide away, don't plan for a siege, don't go to Helm's Deep, which we'll come to shortly. Ride out and meet Saruman's forces head on. Now this has a particular significance for the Rohirrim, right? Because if I bring up my other slideshow, the Rohirrim are known as horse riders. This is their primary mode of being a warrior. And we see this in later battles at the Pelennor Fields in the Return of the King. When they are arrayed there, they have no infantry, they have no siege weapons or artillery, they are all cavalry. And they have a long tradition of being a cavalry people. The horse is one of their... It's almost like a sacred symbol for them. They have a close bond with horses, and they're known for producing the best horses in Middle-earth. And so, as a cavalry people, their strength in warfare, you would imagine, is going to be in the open field. If you put them in a castle or a fortification, you rob them of their strongest asset as a horse. Their cavalry, because cavalry can't really operate on a battlement. So there's already an implicit kind of argument here, and especially as we've seen earlier in the film, that Éomer's horsemen have dispatched a reasonable sized group of orcs and Uruk-hai with cavalry. Now we'll come to the tactics in particular later on in the stream, but I just wanted to kind of highlight this is the kind of implicit logic here of the scene, and we can kind of see why Gandalf's saying this implicitly with this culture of horse riding. There has to be significant costs to going out into the open field for the Rohirrim not to take this strategy. So let's get back to this scene. Just say as well, what a beautiful set they made in the Lord of the Rings. This hall, Edoras, is just absolutely stunning, and something from Beowulf or the Norse sagas. It just is steeped with that old world northern culture and mythology, and it just breathes it into the scene, and just watching it, you just feel like you're transported into it. It's absolutely brilliant.
Éomer cannot help us. I know what it is you want of me, but I will not bring further death to my people. I will not risk open war.
Open war is upon you, whether you would risk it or not.
When last I looked, Theoden, not Aragorn, was king of Rohan.
A bit of unnecessary tension there. But Theoden wants to reassert that he is the sovereign after Grima for so long has been ruling in his stead. He needs to reassert he is the king. And there is this interesting dynamic of he doesn't think that they're really at war with Isengard yet, that these conflicts have been low level, that they're not actually at a full scale war setting. Now we know as the audience that this isn't true. We've seen the forces of Saruman readying for war, but Theoden doesn't necessarily know this at this point in the film. And we'll come to maybe the strength of his strategy in a while.
Then what is the king's decision?
By order of the king, the city must empty. We make for the refuge of Helm's Deep. Do not burden yourself with treasures. Take only what provisions you need.
Helm's Deep. They flee to the mountains when they should stand and fight. Who will defend them if not their king?
He is only doing what he thinks is best for his people. Helm's Deep has saved them in the past.
There is no way out of that ravine. Theoden is walking into a trap. He thinks he's leading them to safety. What they will get is a massacre. Theoden has a strong will, but I fear for him.
So I think this is a really interesting kind of dynamic then in the film. I hadn't really picked up on it when I was younger, but it's jumped out at me at my last viewing. I can take these off now. Is that Gandalf and Gimli, and I think Aragorn as well, all really think that they should be fighting in the open field, that they've got a better chance of beating the Uruk-hai not at Helm's Deep, which is somewhat surprising because the film itself, just on an initial viewing, you think, well, the Uruk-hai have this huge, gigantic army. How are these pretty pathetic and not in the full flush of their best force? How could Rohan ever beat them in the open field? Surely retreating to a castle and the defensive advantages you get from a castle would help the Rohirrim in this situation. So why would we get this sort of logic from Aragorn and Gandalf and Gimli? Now, it's never truly spelled out. There's talk about they'll be trapped in Helm's Deep and they'll be massacred because there's no way out. And that might be an indication. But we don't really get any more than this. This is all we get from them. And so I think that there's a... what I want to do is kind of go into some of the possible tactics that could have been used in an open conflict and see, okay, what might have been a good strategy for Rohan and Isengard in such a situation. Say Theoden does take that possibility on, that, okay, we're going to go and fight Isengard. What would he do? How would he go about it? Well, as I've said, the first thing we should take into account the armament of both sides. What kinds of force can they bring to the table? Rohan, as we know, is a horse-bound culture, and with that cavalry, we see in the films multiple things. We see charges with lances, and this is what we're seeing here in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, arrayed as they are, and they charge. It's interesting. The way that they set up is almost like a late medieval battles system or battalion system. Medieval kind of armies that we see at something like the Battle of Luz, for example, in the mid-1200s. They really form into three groups, and they're led by three leaders, such as the king, Prince Edward, and another member of the nobility. One in the middle, and the others on the flanks. That's the amount of organization these cavalry units are going to have, and they will move forward and engage their opposite on the other side, the opposing battle or battalion. In the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, it's a bit like this. Theoden says to one guy, Eomer, take your Eored or battle down the left flank. Somebody else go down the center, somebody go down the right-hand side. So they set up in a very conventional way, and then they just charge. In other places, we see Eomer leading his men against the orcs at Fangorn Forest, and they throw javelins. So we have some limited kind of ranged attack here. I think the suggestions of arrows that they have some horse archers as well, and certainly if you look at like Games Workshop models or various models that are out there, the Rohirrim have horse archers, but I don't think they were a major part of their forces. So predominantly they're going to be a light to heavy cavalry based force, and this isn't totally implausible, right? You might think, well, how can you have an army without infantry? Lots of large armies in the ancient and medieval world were primarily cavalry. And when we look at, say, the Gothic victory at Adrianople, that came through a large cavalry force absolutely coming into the flank of a Roman force that was not ready for it, which was trapped and couldn't get out of the way. And so that disorder and panic spread into a crumpling mass of people. And increasingly in the medieval period, such as at the Battle of Luz, infantry was relatively irrelevant in these conflicts, and it would just be the two sides with their different battles of horses clashing against each other. There are certain innovations in the late medieval which lead to a decline in the superiority of cavalry, and we'll come to those. But for large portions of it, it really is all about the horseman. He is the key to winning the battle. And so we could imagine a force like this being out there. Now, at that point in the film where we see them, they don't have much of that force. They've sent off 2,000 riders with Eomer up north, as Theoden said. And the force with them is pretty small. Nonetheless, within a few days, Gandalf is able to find Eomer and bring him to Helm's Deep by the end of the film. So we could imagine that actually they could rally troops to them if they stayed at Edoras or around Edoras and build that army up, perhaps before the Uruk-hai come. It's difficult to know, but it's a possibility. On the other side, we have the Uruk-hai, and they are 10,000 strong. They're coming from Isengard, and they're equipped with heavy armor. And what we see here is pikes. They're mostly pikemen, although we have a number with. When we actually get to the Battle of Helm's Deep, their pikes seem, they do that scene where they bang the pipes up and down, and then they discard them because they're no good on walls. They need swords and shields. So they have swords and shields, pikes. They also have crossbowmen and archers, and especially in the Fellowship of the Ring, we see kind of lighter troops with archery. One of them kills Boromir with his arrows, but they definitely have crossbows at the Siege of Helm's Deep, and they use them to decent effect. Now, there doesn't seem to be loads of these guys, loads of archery, but they have a solid amount. So they're primarily an infantry force, mostly pikemen / swordsmen, with a smattering of ranged attack thrown in there. Very heavily armored, and remember the quality of these troops as well. So these are highly trained, aggressive, wholly bent on destruction Uruk-hai. They are unlike the Rohirrim, who some of them are warriors, but many of them, as we see at Helm's Deep, are boys and old men, farmers, etc. They're not really the type of people used to combat, and whereas these creatures are born for combat. The Uruk-hai also have a small cavalry. This is the Warg Riders. The Warg Riders are sent ahead of them to try and intercept the Rohirrim before they reach Helm's Deep, and are defeated by Theoden's household. That implies to me they don't have lots of Warg Riders. There doesn't seem to be a lot of them. They're about equal with Theoden's group, so they're not really a substantial force. They're not like the thousands of horsemen out there with Eomer. They are effective, and especially with the fact that the steed, the warg, is itself a weapon, and perhaps even more dangerous than the orc on top of it. So they're an interesting group, but they would very much be a small part of this 10,000 strong army. So how would these two sides line up? Well, I think perhaps a good model to think about would be, from the Isengard point of view, the Battle of Crecy, which we can see here, the Battle of Crecy, as and this is from a book by a guy called Charles Oman. Oman was a supremely influential historian in the 19th and early 20th century. He was president of the Royal Historical Society. He had a professorship at Oxford, and he really pioneered medieval military studies and scholarship. And in his book, The Art of War in the Middle Ages, he tracks the changes in the development of medieval warfare and the different weapons and tactics and strategies that were employed at different points. And in chapter 6, he goes on to one of the key innovations of the period, which was the longbow. The longbow, which was incorporated into the English army by Edward I once Wales had been conquered. And it really revolutionized how the English approached warfare, because up until that point, as I've been indicating, it was mainly this cavalry conflict, and both sides would send their cavalry in against each other, and through the stramash, one side would win. Now we have different types of troop being employed and working together to produce a tactical superiority over a predominantly cavalry force. Crecy is the example of this, and I want to read what he writes here, because I think it conveys an example from history which would be which could be employed by the Uruk-hai against the Rohirrim. So Oman writes, the scientific method of receiving a charge of horsemen by archers flanked with supporting troops was first practiced by Edward III at Crecy. When he determined to fight, he chose an excellent position on the gentle slope of a hill, whose flanks were protected by woods and a little brook, which also ran along the front of the line. Following the immemorial usage of the Middle Ages, the army was drawn up in 3 battles. This is what I was telling you about earlier. One commanded by the Prince of Wales. This is the Black Edward. The second, the Earl of Northampton, and the third by the king himself. So this is Edward III. In the front battle, on which the greater part of the fighting was to fall, 2,000 archers were flanked by 2 bodies of 800 dismounted men-at-arms. So you can see that in this depiction, at the top of the map, the letter B is next to these long lines, and that is the archers, the English archers, and A represents the men-at-arms. Now, men-at-arms were the knights, but they had dismounted and been told to plant their lances into the, use their lances like pikes. So they're effectively working as pikemen or spearmen while heavily armored. So it's quite an interesting use of a knight. We think of them mainly as cavalry, but here we have dismounted cavalry. The second line, so that's behind the front, was formed in a similar order, while between the two were ranged 1,000 Welsh and Cornish light infantry armed with javelins and long knives. The reserve of 2,000 archers and 700 mounted men occupied the summit of the hill. So they're on a nice location. Their flanks are guarded both by the terrain and by these hardcore infantry. They're on a slope, so the enemy are going to be coming up towards them. They've got the high ground. They're in the best possible position they can be. Nothing could be more characteristic of the indiscipline of the French army than the fact that it forced on the battle of a day sooner than its leader had intended. On observing the English position, Philip and his marshals had determined to defer the conflict till the next morning, as the troops had been marching since daybreak. When, however, the order to halt reached the vanguard, the nobles at the head of the column believed that they were to be deprived of the honour of the opening fight, as they could see that some of the troops in the rear were still advancing. They therefore pushed on, and, as the main body persisted in following them, the whole army arrived so close to the English position that a battle became unavoidable. The circumstances of that day have often been described. It is unnecessary to detail the mishap of the unfortunate Genoese crossbowmen, who were shot down in scores while going through the cumbrous process of winding up their arbalests. So that's them here, these black lines next to the letter A. They are the Genoese crossbowmen, and they were using a piece of equipment that takes a long time to load. I think an English longbowman could fire off 6 arrows in a minute, let's say, whereas they could only do 2 or 3. So it takes a long time, and if you're under heavy fire from above, you're going to be wiped out. The fruitless charges of the cavalry against the front of the line of archers led to endless slaughter, till the ground was heaped with the bodies of men and horses, and further attempts to advance became impossible. Only on the flanks was the charge pressed home, but when the Counts of Flanders and Algernon came on the compact masses of dismounted cavalry who covered the wings of the archery, their progress was at an end. They fell before the line of lances, which they were unable to break, and fared no better than their comrades in the centre. That evening the French fell back in disorder, and their whole army dispersed. The English had won the day without stirring a foot from their position. The enemy had come to them to be killed. Considerably more than a third of his numbers lay dead in front of the English line, and of these far the greater number had fallen by the arrows of the bowmen. Crecy had proved that the archer, when adequately supported on his flanks, could beat off the most determined of cavalry charges. The moral, however, which was drawn from it by the French was one of a different kind, and that's a story for another day. But the point here is that if you can have archers in the center firing down a hill who are secure on their flanks by terrain and supporting troops, it's almost impossible to budge them with cavalry. Cavalry cannot do it. Indeed, archers are arguably one of the best ways to overcome a cavalry charge, because they're big targets, so firing into them is pretty easy, and you can disrupt a charge quite quickly. A horse falling is going to cause chaos amongst the other horses behind, and so you cause them to split off, to halt in their tracks, to fail to continue that charge. So not only is it a good way of resisting them, but you're actually going to disrupt their charging formations. And remember as well, these archers, they don't just have their bows that they're using. They would plant, each archer in the English army carried a stake, so he would plant his stake in the ground. So there's a line of stakes here as well, guarding the archers, and there's the stream. So they had a really strong point where these poor horses are going up the hill in muddy terrain. They're going over the corpses of their comrades. It was just hopeless. So I imagine that the Uruk-hai could take up a similar position. They could place their crossbowmen and archers in the middle, their pikemen to the sides. The Rohirrim would struggle in that situation, especially if it was somewhere like the Fords of Isen, where they've got a river that needs to be forded by the Rohirrim before they can attack. There are, however, 2 problems with this strategy for Isengard. The first being that the Rohirrim probably wouldn't afford them such a position to take. Indeed, Rohan is a pretty flat country with lots of plains. There are rolling hills, but there isn't forests apart from on the very outskirts. There aren't these kind of perfect positions for the Isengardians to take, and so they wouldn't have that superiority of being able to funnel in this way that we've got here. They'd actually be quite easily surrounded, I reckon, by the Rohirrim, especially as the Rohirrim have the cavalry advantage and mobility to do so on the open ground, but B, the Rohirrim know the country like the back of their hands. They know every nook and cranny. They know how the hills undulate. The orcs, the Uruk-hai, don't have that same knowledge, and so there's a good chance here that they wouldn't get this sort of perfect ground. And even if they did, there's a third thing actually that I should have mentioned. The Uruk-hai let me put it another way. The Rohan don't need to force this war. They're not on the clock. in beating Saruman. They, in part because they don't know the subsequent events of the books, where they'll need to be there to save Gondor and so on at this point. They just have to save Rohan at this point. They just have to fight off Isengard, and they don't need to rush to do that. Yeah, they want to repel them, but it's not like they have to get it done tomorrow. They can take their time. They can choose where they fight. They can choose how and when they engage with the enemy to maximize their advantages as a cavalry force. Isengard don't seem to have that luxury. Saruman is pretty clear he wants them destroyed as soon as possible. And this is because he believes, with his superior knowledge through the Palantir, that Sauron is going to make a move against Mordor, that Sauron is also believes Saruman has betrayed him by trying to take the hobbits to Isengard rather than to Mordor. That is Merry and Pippin. So he needs to move now. He needs to destroy Rohan as quickly as possible so he can secure the terrain, he can secure the country, and build up his forces for the kind of coming rush for land and power. So he doesn't have time to lose. So he's going to have to force the fight. And so the Uruk-hai are going to have to push to find a way of engaging with the Rohirrim. So if there was something like that to happen, it's tricky because the Uruk-hai don't have the mobility of the Rohirrim. So if the Rohirrim want, they can avoid contact most of the time. The exception would be if the Uruk-hai get close to maybe, say, the women and children and the elderly and those who can't fight, and that they are, say, dwelling back at Edoras. If the Uruk-hai come towards Edoras, they're going to force a fight in that situation. But even then, they're not going to be able to take up a position where their flanks and rear are secure. So what kind of formation might they take in that situation? Well, I think actually the Battle of Falkirk in the 1290s, I think it was, 1296, 98, between the forces of Edward I and William Wallace are instructive here. William Wallace had a similar sort of army to the Uruk-hai. And I don't mean that in a pejorative against Scots. I mean in the sense of how they were armed and equipped. They didn't have much cavalry. They didn't have much in the way of archery. They had a lot of spearmen, lowland pikemen. This is a tradition in Scotland, the pike, going back hundreds of years, and many battles against the English feature the Scottish pikemen. So what did Wallace do? Well, he formed what's called a schiltron. And you can see these circles here. The schiltron was really just almost like a hedgehog. It's a massive wall of pikes and spears in a circle, so that whatever angle you come from, you're meeting a wall of spikes. Now, Wallace took this position because the English strength lay in its heavy cavalry. And cavalry, if you've got a spear and a pike wall, it can't break through that. It's too dense, and your horse will be killed before you even get close to the enemy. So this was an effective way of dealing with the English horsemen. And so we could say maybe the Uruk-hai do that, and they put their archers in between, and this will be their way of overcoming the Rohirrim in the open field. However, the English had their secret weapon, which is the archer, the Welsh or English longbowman, and they were able just to fire straight down atop these schiltrons. They're stationary targets, they're not moving, and so they're really easy to fire into. And it was absolute carnage. They were able to take out so many of the Scottish soldiers by doing so. It was becoming untenable. The Scots were unable to reply. They didn't have their own cavalry they didn't have the numbers of cavalry required to mount a response, and they didn't have their own archery to mount a response. So the schiltrons start to break apart and move towards the archers to try and respond to them. In so doing, they lose their formation, they lose their solidity, they lose their very strength. And as they do so, the horsemen the English knights, which we can see on the flanks here, charge in. And once they're inside the Schiltron, once it's been broken up, the Scots were there for the slaughter. So the combination of archer and horseman together, working in tandem, was able to break up this really rock-solid infantry formation. So we could see that if the Rohirrim could bring archery to bear, they could overcome a force like what we've got in front of us here, the Isengard force. And in the film, they do get some archery support. The elves of Lothlorien come to Helm's Deep, and in some kind of reminiscence or recapitulation of the Last Alliance, bring their bows to bear, and they are some of the best archers in Middle-earth. Now, there's not a lot of them. There's only a few hundred. Maybe if there was 1,000 or so, it might have been more effective. But nonetheless, could this group be used to break open the Uruk-hai formations and then allow the horsemen to enter in from Rohan? That might be the best way that they could win a pitched battle. I think so. To me, actually, the Uruk-hai's best chance is if the forces are, evenly matched in terms of numerical superiority. Then that would be the way. Of course, the Uruk-hai seem to have far more men or soldiers, I should say, than the Rohan or the Galadrim here. So maybe just pure numbers would overwhelm these guys. So I think this is all kind of only if there's a possibility of getting Éomer back and so on. Oh, before we move on to the next section, there is another possibility for Rohan here, because I do think, even though I've outlined some tactics which might work in their favor given the terrain of Rohan, there's a good chance they would lose a pitched battle against such numbers. So if they're of a smaller number or unable to mount a proper offensive, what they could do is run some sort of guerrilla warfare where they hit and run on the plains. They're faster than the Uruk-hai. They don't need to engage them in a one-to-one fight. They can stretch them out. They can make them chase them across the dunes. Remember, the Uruk-hai need to defeat the Rohirrim. They need to win this battle. They need to win this war quickly. So they're going to chase. They're going to try and pin down the Rohirrim. So if the Rohirrim can lead them on a merry dance across the plains and hit them when they're least expecting it, hit them while they're on the move, and then retreat, and keep doing this, they'll wear them down. They won't be able to keep going. And although Uruk-hai are fitter and stronger and have more discipline than the Orcs, they will eventually be struggling if they keep getting picked off in this way. It will become very frustrating to them. And it could even reach a point where they're able to wear them down to such an extent that they have to return back to Isengard. There is some kind of historical precedence for this. When Edward I marched north to take on William Wallace with his army, Wallace didn't engage, and his plan was never to engage the English in an open combat. They stuck to guerrilla tactics, harrying the English and ambushing them where they needed. They only had to. That would have been successful. The English and Welsh units within the army were actually fighting in camp, and Edward was about to return to England, unable to catch Wallace, when they managed to catch them camping at Falkirk, and that's where that battle took place. If Wallace had managed to get away, it would have been successful in repelling the English, in part because the English couldn't stay over winter. They didn't have the resources. Their army was feuding with each other. They were frustrated. They wouldn't have been able to remain in the field. And given the size of Saruman's army, 10,000 Uruk-hai, that's a lot of resource you're going to need. That's a huge baggage train. That's a lot of food and armor and equipment. And given the nature of orcs and Uruk-hai and the Lord of the Rings, even the most disciplined, there's going to be fighting in the ranks at some point. I'm pretty confident of that, given what we know in Middle-earth. So they probably would have had to return to Isengard if they had taken up this approach long enough and managed to lead them on a merry dance. So that would have been another possibility for them to do that. And maybe that's what Gandalf had in mind. Of course, the weakness of that approach is if the Uruk-hai do decide, okay, we're going to ignore the main body of the Rohirrim and head straight to Edoras, where the civilians are, then that would, they would be totally exposed. Well, not totally exposed isn't the right word. They would be exposed and, in real danger, and that would draw the Rohirrim into a conflict because I don't think they would allow their people to be massacred. They're not that type of people. They're an honor culture. And so they're going to be drawn into that fight. So that might be the Uruk-hai strategy to ensure that they actually do pin down the Rohirrim forces. So let's say then, okay, they're not going to take that approach. They're going to try and hold out in a siege and hope that they can outlast the Uruk-hai in a siege context. Theoden decides to go to Helm's Deep. But there are, I think, there's a couple of other options that they could have taken, and it's worth assessing them before turning to Helm's Deep itself. The first is actually staying at Edoras. Now, this isn't a undefended position, and it's not a wholly terrible one. If you look at it in these paintings, I think they're by John Howe or Alan Lee, what you can see is that Edoras is on top of a hill. It's on the perfect location for a fortification. Indeed, it could be like a Motte and Bailey castle, or indeed many more developed castles are on top of hills because they're hard places to assault. You have to climb up while people are throwing stuff down on top of you. And getting siege equipment up there is going to be more difficult. Indeed, some of the hill here might even be quite sheer, and really the only access may well be through the gates. It's palisaded with gates, and in the film, the gatehouse is a proper gatehouse with flanking towers. It's got many levels, and you could implement more kind of gateways throughout it. They could have developed more palisades and so on within the stockades within the town to produce many levels of having to ascend through. And indeed, up to the top, we could have another kind of gatehouse at the top leading into the Great Hall if they had time for preparations. They could also put in further preparations around outside of Edoras. So would there have been time to dig a ditch in front of the gateway? Maybe putting like spikes out there and stakes and so on, making it harder to get close to the gateway. That's all possible things which wouldn't have taken, but it would take all the men and women working together, but it's possible that they could actually implement some of these minor additions in the run-up to the battle, especially as Edoras is further away from Isengard than is Helm's Deep. The primary weakness of this place is firstly that it's wooden. The defenses are wooden, so they could be burnt down quite easily. And secondly, it's there's no real place to separate the civilians and the warriors. You could put them up in the hall, but it's not. They're too close, really. They're going to be in harm's way. Thirdly, the force that they're up against is 10,000 strong, and so even if this is relatively, a relatively decent defensive structure that could be used for useful against, say, the wild men raiding the towns, the wild men aren't going to try and get in here. It's going to be quite difficult for them. For a serious force with battering rams and what seem to be ballista and ladders, this isn't a major challenge in the same way. It would be a challenge, though, that these walls will be defended, and just like a stone wall, they can be used. It's just the fact that they're weaker. They're weaker to fire. They're weaker to force, and they cover. They're not as high. which is another factor. And so I can see why they moved away from here. But as I say, it's not a wholly indefensible place. I think it's stronger than it's made out in the film. And if you added in multiple levels or layers of defense, it could be quite strong. But there is a place close to Edoras, which I think, the more I think about it, I think it's the strongest place in the whole of Rohan that really Theoden should have taken everybody to in the films. And it is Dun Harrow. Dun Harrow is in the Return of the King, where they muster the Rohirrim. And this is actually a drawing by Tolkien of the top of Dun Harrow, which you can't really see it on this how it's shown here. But on the left-hand side, there's a kind of winding path up to the top where there is this area leading into the mountains. Now, the mountains are... the Rohirrim are scared of them. They know there's some dark, twisted creatures, the dead of Dun Harrow, who live in there, and nobody who goes in those paths returns. So they're not going to go in there. But you do have on here a plateau, a leveled plateau, which is only accessible by one very narrow path. And it's really high up. I'll see if I can find the actual video of it, because I think it's... I think that will demonstrate why I'm suggesting here quite effectively. Here we go. Let's see if this... Hopefully you can see that now. So Theoden and Aragorn and the Rohirrim from Edoras are just arriving. You can turn that down. And they're mustering at the foot of Dun Harrow at this point. At the foot of it. Now, in a moment, we're going to see the actual scale of this place. Okay. Up the top here, we have Dun Harrow, the camp of Dun Harrow here. This is the pathway up the mountainside to Dun Harrow. It is extremely narrow. It is sheer. There's no way you're bringing siege equipment up there. There's no way that you can get large forces all at once up there. This is a really secure location. If the Uruk-hai, 10,000 Uruk-hai could attack here. Let's see, there's a good... Okay, this is Aragorn and Theoden at the top of Dun Harrow. Here's the path, winding up the hillside. The Uruk-hai could all be down here. They can't attack you up here. Their weaponry is not going to reach all the way up here. If they're coming up the pathway, well, you can drop rocks on them, you can throw things at them, you can fire arrows at them, you can do all sorts of things. And because it's so narrow, you can outnumber them. When they get to the top, you will have more men up there. You can surround them. You can hold a shield wall. It will be pretty constant, but you have a strong chance of funneling these Uruk-hai, and you have a massively defensible position. It'd be really hard to take. I think, given as well that this is close to Edoras and that it's further away from Isengard than Helm's Deep, you would actually have time to build maybe some palisades, a small gatehouse of wood. But even that would be good because, as I say, they can't get siege weapons up here. They're not going to be able to set it on fire so easily. And you would be in a strong location to do so. So you get up this windy path, people throwing stuff on top of you, and you get to the gatehouse. This sounds to me like a really, really good position. I think it's always struck me that this is actually the place where they should have gone. And it's surprise isn't the right word because I understand the logic of going to Helm's Deep. But I think, why did the Rohirrim never build a fort up here? Is it because of the Paths of the Dead are so terrifying to them? Perhaps. But this is a super defensible position. Now, the one problem with this place or maybe it's one of many, is resources. Okay, Helm's Deep has the Glittering Caves, which is this vast cave network, and it seems like they're able to store food down there, provisions, supplies, and they could do so for many months if they had prepared sufficiently. Because these are cold, dry places where they're not going to be affected by water and the elements. As far as I know, Dunharrow doesn't have any of these things. So you get to the top, it's just grass. So you'd have to bring your food with you, and they don't have a lot of time to collect food and store it. So if they're expecting a prolonged siege, this could end really badly up here, because they're going to starve to death. Whereas Helm's Deep, they seem like they could have provisions to last for a while. So that might explain why they don't come here. On a kind of on that level of thinking through how long can we survive in a place, where can our resources be. Now we could think, well, if they built a fort on the top here, they could store those resources, but that would require planning predating the scenario that Theoden faces. So I understand why they could not do it here, but I kind of wish they had, because if they built that fort, it would have been magnificent to see them on top of here defending it against the Uruk-hai, and they would have been in a much stronger position in some ways. Now, before I get to Helm's Deep itself, I want to just remind everybody that I will read comments towards the end. So if you have any thoughts about what I've said so far, any suggestions for other places they could have gone, or any further comments on this sort of topic, get them in, and I will have a look at the end at the comments in the chat. I'm also going to say a little bit about what's in store for Pendragon in 2026. Just a brief mention once we get through this. So, Helm's Deep. Now, I must say, I'm gonna be quite clear here. I wanted to say it earlier, was that you often see people tearing apart the Peter Jackson films for their tactics and the military strategy that's employed in them, and saying it's ridiculous, it's not practical, it's not historical, and it feels a bit mean-spirited to me, because really these sieges and battles are some of the best cinema I've ever seen, and many people have seen. They're so inspiring, they evoke in us so many emotions, and they're just visual spectacles, and they're brilliant storytelling. And they're not designed to replicate a historical siege in every single aspect of its accuracy. So I'm not going to sit here and kind of criticize Tolkien or Jackson or anybody. I don't think for the way they've gone about it. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's in the proper spirit of the Lord of the Rings either. Rather, everything I've said so far and what I'm going to say about Helm's Deep is really more kind of, if I was in Theoden's position, or a Rohan's position, or an Uruk's position, what would I do? And that's how I'm thinking about it. It's very much in the spirit of fun exploration, because I think we're too quick to just kind of nitpick, whereas actually, no, I'm not interested in nitpicking every aspect of the siege. It's rather, okay, what could have been done in a different way, and how might that have affected the oncoming battle? And the first thing to say in this is, we've been talking about sieges a lot. One of the kind of interesting aspects of the attack on Helm's Deep is its rapidity. Most sieges were not quick. They lasted weeks and months. Indeed, somewhere like Kenilworth Castle it took 6 months to besiege. Bamborough Castle was 9 months to besiege. And often the way that a siege was won was one side, the attacking side, would surround the fortress, the stronghold, and starve out the opposition, unless a relieving force came in time to attack the besieging one, and together maybe those inside sallying out while the relieving force attacking, they might be able to overthrow the besiegers. It's one of those two options is going to be the main way that a siege is won, because castles and fortresses are really hard to take. They're difficult places to attack. They're designed to frustrate and be a real challenge for people to conquer. It's not like in the movies, like The Lord of the Rings, where people can just get over the walls pretty easily. No, you've got people throwing stuff on top of you, rocks, boiling water, spears, javelins. There's arrows flying at you. Like, just think how difficult that is. Even for somebody really fit, somebody used to a military context. At the end of the day, we're not superhumans. We're all human. And even the greatest of us is going to struggle in such a context, because there's only so much you can do. There's only so much strength you have. And so most sieges result in a starvation or a relief. And so in a way, that's what Theoden is kind of planning with going to Helm's Deep. He thinks, we'll sit up tight here, we'll hold out, and hopefully either the Uruk-hai army will have to go away because they'll run out of resources and they'll need to return to Isengard. And by that time, maybe our forces can build again. Perhaps it's, he's thinking kind of conventionally. He's not really recognizing he's dealing with Uruk-hai. He's thinking, okay, the men who are besieging us will have to go home for the winter or when they run out of food. It's not really the way the Uruk-hai are. And he's thinking the Uruk-hai might just try and starve us out. They're not going to be able to come over this fortress, so they're going to try and starve us out. The kind of further point here, I should say as well, there's this silly thing in the film where Aragorn's like, send out riders for help, my lord. And Theoden says, no, there's no point because nobody's going to come. I'm just going to pretend that like, okay, that happens in the film, but if I was there, you're not just sending out riders at that point, you're sending the riders out when you're leaving Edoras to call for aid if you can, sending them to get Éomer and other Rohirrim to come to Helm's Deep to help you, sending them to Gondor, sending them to Rivendell, perhaps. Now, you might not think that they're going to be answered, but you still try. It seems a very strange thing for Theoden to say, and kind of out of character, but that to me would be an obvious point that you would do, because, as I say, the whole strategy of a siege is often either you're hoping your opponent runs out of resources, or a relieving army is going to help you. So you're banking on that, because you're stuck behind these walls and your food's running out. He doesn't kind of recognize the fact, and there's no reason to, that the Uruk-hai have to strike now. And so rather than them trying to starve out the Rohirrim, which would be a very simple way to win this siege, they launch an attack almost immediately. I will add as well, there's one further point here. The longer a siege goes on, the more likely either side is going to come to terms, precisely because of what I've just said. If your food's running out, and that counts for both sides, if your men are getting discontented, if disease is starting to spread, etc., you're more likely to come to terms, and the terms are going to be more favorable. So it's in both sides' interests to try and have a longer siege to a certain extent, because they're more likely to get the terms that they want to some degree. So I think it's you might think, oh well, Theoden might think he can do this. The problem he's got is the Uruk-hai are not like your normal attacker. As I've said earlier in the stream, the Uruk-hai want to destroy Rohan. They want to kill their men, women, and children and leave nothing left but destruction. They are vengeful, malicious, and spiteful. They're not here to get a surrender from Rohan. They want to annihilate Rohan. This is very different from most sieges where they would be quite happy to take the surrender of the people inside, providing that they submit in terms of giving over territory or becoming subjects of another ruler. etc., etc. So he doesn't have that option on the table, whereas he might be playing for that in another context, maybe against the Wildmen, let's say. Or if Gondor, for whatever reason, was attacking them. So he has to mount a defense of Helm's Deep almost immediately. And let's see if we can... Yes, we've got a good little battle map here of Helm's Deep. So we can see that its structure is made up... It's a kind of an interesting structure because it's into the mountainside. It doesn't have walls all the way around it like a lot of castles do, but it doesn't need to because the mountain acts as its walls at the rear. So it really only has a front face. And these are the deeping wall, which is a kind of curtain wall for an outer courtyard. And through it runs this stream, the deeping stream, through the culvert. Next to it is the Hornburg, and this is really like your inner ward. Your keep is inside it, but it's interesting because it's got a kind of concentric design. You can see here that up the ramp through the main gate, you have an outer wall and an inner wall. And so this is actually like a concentric castle. Concentric doesn't necessarily mean perfect concentricity, just that one wall encloses another. And so these are the two areas with the main hall behind. And the caves are further to the back, down towards the deeping stream. To my mind, there are some improvements that could be made to this castle to make it more defensible. And I'm not talking about overturning everything that you've got here. That's not necessary. I think that there's I think there's improvements to the already existing design that could be made to this. And the first one is I want to emphasize that there are a couple of gateways in this, or arches that could be turned into gateways. This is... Let me come back to that. You can see here. So this is a gateway that is linking the outer area to the inner area. It's just next to the Berg. You can kind of see that black mass there, up the stairs to the Berg. But you'll see that there is no gate here. Now, to me, this is an obvious starting point. Let's make another gate. Let's put another set of doors on this archway. That means if somebody gets through the main gateway, they have another gate to get through, and you can keep attacking them. You can keep pelting them with stones, loosing arrows at them, etc., etc. And it's always struck me that in the film, when they get through the main gateway of the Hornburg, there's like almost no time at all, and they're in the inner courtyard. There's just the defense immediately collapses when the gateway collapses. Whereas actually, if you have multiple gateways, you are able to keep the resistance up and make it incredibly difficult for the attacker to get in. So I would most definitely... You can see it here. Actually, this is a even better version of the angle. You can see that once you're through this gateway, there's no gate here. Let's put a gate in here. I would even argue you can put more defenses in here, so you could have more barriers, maybe another gateway as such, or something like it, along this corridor. And this would, again, slow down the advance of the enemy. Within this gatehouse, we only have one gate. If it was possible, and again, these are things which maybe with more time they could have done, let's get a portcullis in there behind the gate. It doesn't have to be metal, it could be a wooden one, but you put a wooden latticed portcullis. Again, really hard to move. You're going to force the Uruk-hai to use their battering ram or set fire to it while you're attacking them from the sides, from above. You can have some machicolations in the gatehouse, dropping through murder holes various objects on top of them. Or if they're trying to set fire to the portcullis or the gate, you can pour water on it to put it out. So there's ways we could improve these gatehouses just to slow down the attackers and give you more time to defend your inner areas. And this would also mean that you lose less men, because if you're, okay, say this gatehouse falls, well, if there's another gate here, you actually have time to get people into the inner courtyard if the attackers are slowed down. So this would be one way that we could do it. I would also add that there should be, I don't think this version has it actually, but in the film there's a stairway that leads from the is it here, leads up into the back onto the battlements, or into the Hornburg. Let's put another gatehouse here if we're able to. And it, again, because the Rohirrim didn't build Helm's Deep, or the Hornburg as it's properly called, they it was the Gondorians, it was the Númenóreans. So it's people who are more advanced in their technology. So even if you can't do that, can you build a wooden structure in this place? Could you build a brattice on top of a wooden on a stone battlement where you can fire down on? These are possibilities that are not really explored. And I think even if you put something here, some kind of mechanism where you can shut off this area from here, this, sorry, you're not able to see my mouse. I mean, from the deeping wall, the stairs, if you put one at the bottom of those stairs, let's have something here, a barbican, where that tower is, leading up to another gateway into the outer area, then gateways in the inner area. You've given yourself time. You've given yourself time, and more Uruk-hai are going to have to die to get through these areas. As it is, once you get through one defense, you're almost, the way this is set up, it's not that difficult to get into the heart of this complex, and that's why it falls so easily. Another addition that could be made here. So you can see here that the ramp that goes over the Deeping Stream is pretty high up, and it is decently narrow. And it's a struggle for the Uruk-hai. They're getting arrows are coming at them from the Hornburg, from the keep, into their sides. And so it's a reasonably effective defensive mechanism. But I think it could be bolstered even more. And this might go back to the original design. But if we, let's go back here. Where the ramp meets the river, or goes over the river, on the other side, could you have a barbican, like a small gatehouse in front of the main gate? And between the main gate and the barbican, a drawbridge? Or even further back, could you have a drawbridge meeting up with the ramp? If you had a drawbridge, you automatically remove the ability to use a ram against your gateway. The opposition are going to have to build a bridge for the ramp to go across, and you can attack them while they're doing that. And moreover, it takes time to do that. So it gives you more time to hold out, to wait for the relief force. A drawbridge would be a really effective thing to use here, especially given the heights involved. So you can't just walk across, right? It's so high up. You can see it again here, really high off the ground. This one doesn't show it so well, but you can see that it's a steep drop. It's a steep drop at the very top. So if you had a drawbridge there at the top with another landing or barbican to defend it, this would be a really difficult set of gateways to get through. So I think there's ways you could improve certainly the Hornburg, the main part of the fortress. And I think that's quite important, because how to put it, the Deeping Wall, this big curtain wall across the valley, it's useful insofar as it defends this valley, and you can use it to fire across to the ramp. It defends perhaps one aspect of the Hornburg, but it isn't a curtain wall that goes around it. You don't have to go through this to get to the Hornburg. You could avoid it. You could ignore it. So to me, if you can strengthen the main complex of wards, you're in a safer position. Nonetheless, there is something I would change on the Deeping Wall, and it is adding towers. We can see that there are towers on the Hornburg's curtain wall, and these are really important because if somebody gets to the foot of the wall, you don't want to have to be stretching over the parapet where you're exposed to enemy arrows and javelins and siege weapons, that you're in a dangerous position. And moreover, your angle is bad. It's hard to fire an arrow at someone directly below you. Whereas if you have outer walls coming from the curtain, if you have outer towers on the curtain wall of a spherical shape, not only are they harder to attack, they're harder to hit, arrows bounce off them more easily because of the angles, they're harder to undermine, but more importantly, you have angles now to attack people who are going up against the wall. You can flank them and fire at them. So I think that this wall would benefit from maybe another tower or two structures that could be useful here. But again, that's a fundamental architectural point which Theoden doesn't have time for. So to me, if you can bolster the defenses within the Hornburg by making gates, if you can, or at least obstructions, that's going to be a better start. I would also add they could actually put a palisade in the in the valley here behind the deeping wall. So okay, you get through there. Yes, you have access to the Hornburg, or at least up the stairs towards it. But you still need to defend this further part behind. And actually, if somebody gets in, if you've got a palisade behind made of wood, you can still use that as a defensive structure to fire arrows down upon those who have got through. You want to be able to attack people when they get into a courtyard, so that it's not pleasant for them, that they're still under a threat. This is not possible here, really. They're just allowed to wander around this area, and given the glittering caves are somewhere back here, yeah, you're leaving your people exposed. So I think you need another palisade built here, just even if the Urks aren't coming this way, just to harass them, just to cause them trouble, just to give them another obstacle before they get to the Great Hall. Well, it's the Hornburg and the Great Hall. I think from the Urukai's perspective, I mean, there's been a lot of talk I've seen of ladders not usually being very successful, and that you should try to clear a wall using artillery to batter down the crenellations. Those are the merlons and crenelles. So the merlon being the tooth, the crenelle being the gap between, that lovely shape you get in castles. You need to batter these down with artillery. You need to pepper the wall with arrows, and by doing so, you can drive those on the walls off it, and so then prepare a successful escalade. Whether that's true, I don't know. Of course, they have numbers on their side. I think if they had time, then maybe preparing more advanced trenches, sapping. So sapping is where you dig a trench all the way up to the wall. They could have done something like that, right? Where under the protection of a cat, which is like a shelter, a wooden shelter, you could have engineers digging a sap right up to the stream, to the culvert, and then placing the mines inside and then blowing it up. This is a kind of form of mining. Mining was arguably the most effective method of attacking a castle, where once you get up to the castle wall with your sap, you start digging underneath it, you remove foundational stones and put wooden poles in their place, and then set it on fire and the whole thing crumbles down. This was the clearest way of breaking through stone, because you're going underneath it and using the pressure of the stones without their foundation to collapse it. Essentially, that's what the Urukai do in the battle. They use this culvert, this weak spot, to place gunpowder underneath and then explode it up in spectacular fashion, causing a breach. They could do that through this method that I've just described. Much harder to do that to the Hornburg because it's on a raised platform, and this is where Edoras is actually quite good because that also is on a hill, so it's much harder to dig underneath it because you have to get up the hill to do so. But it may be possible in the long run. But at least if you can get into the Deeping Wall through this method, it would be less costly to you. But otherwise, I don't think actually there's too much that I would change from this siege, given that they have to rush it. because they have to rush it, they have to go now. Whereas if you were going a long-term siege, starving them out would be the easiest way to do it. A kind of how to put it? I think that the only other option the Uruks may have had in drawing out the Rohirrim is by there's other towns and villages around Rohan which have not managed to get to Helm's Deep. Could they go on raids, capture some of those people, and hold them ransom, hold them hostage until the Rohirrim come out, do terrible things to them, and cause the Rohirrim to come out in a blaze of glory? Perhaps, but I don't know if that would be. That's a long shot. That's a long shot. Another possibility could be that. They've given away their position quite quickly, so there's very little chance of subterfuge. But if Saruman had managed to keep Grima with the Rohirrim, if he hadn't been discovered, if he had been a bit more subtle in his influence, could he have opened the gate for them in the middle of the night? Could he have been a traitor within the ranks? If they had that on their side, and that's happened in many times in the past. Peter Spalding of the garrison of Berwick upon Tweed helped the Scots get inside the town walls for payment and for love of his Scottish wife, and thus the Scots were able to take the town on the third time of asking. There's countless examples of this. I think in the Crusades, was it Antioch, where one fellow let the Crusaders in? He opened the gates for them. So could a Grima help in this situation, especially if you're short of time? Perhaps. So that is a kind of overview of the strategy and tactics of Isengard and Rohan in the Two Towers and in the Lord of the Rings. And I think it raises interesting points about the nature of medieval warfare particularly, and how different kinds of armies and peoples have different strengths and weaknesses that you can put against each other. And thinking through logically how you can defend a place or attack a place it's not just a fun exercise. It's somewhat a useful one for stimulating the mind, and also just thinking through some of these situations, whether historical or fictional. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes now going. That's the end of that. So I'm going to spend a few minutes now just giving you a wee kind of update about what's going to happen in 2026 with Pendragon. But in the meantime, if you have any comments about the kind of strategy and tactics of the Rohirrim or the Uruk-hai in the Lord of the Rings that you want me to engage with, post them in the chat now, and I'll get to them afterwards. There should be a chat function, especially on YouTube. We're going live on the Pendragon Foundation channel, the Nathan Hood channel, and also the X. I don't know if on X you can post or not. It's not always clear to me, but yes. So hopefully you'll be able to get your comments through on one of these three platforms. I've never streamed on 3 before. It's a new thing for me, trying out new things, and that's really what Pendragon. A lot of what we're trying to do is we're not just trying to restore castles. We want to see them integrated into community life once again, and so we're doing something which is not just well, preserving a castle is a magnificent achievement. But we think the best way to do that is by taking innovative approaches to restoration and to making them functional today. And when I say functional, that sounds a bit scary to some people, and rightly so. I think because it makes it sound like, oh, you're going to rob it of some of its magic? Are you going to take away some of its historical grandeur by turning it into something which is pragmatic and or out of keeping with the building? And that's definitely not what we're about. We really believe in elevating these things. And indeed, there's Historic England, who oversee most of the, I guess, the upkeep of many castles in England. They have a really helpful rubric for thinking about the significance of a castle or a historic building. One is its historical significance. So maybe it was tied to a certain important event or person, or perhaps the building illustrates a historical culture or form of architecture. It exemplifies it. So maybe somewhere like Warwick Castle, which has a lot of live action history, that is illustrating not only through its architecture, but what happens there, how medieval society operated, what the people were like, and what jousting was like, or tournaments, and so on. So it's not just associated with the past, it's illustrating the past, both in its building form and its function. It could have aesthetic significance. So maybe the architecture is particularly beautiful, and within its setting, so its setting being its environment, maybe that's a beautiful environment that it sits within. These are maybe the two main ones. A third one might be archaeology. So you could have an archaeological significance if there are certain items that could be found there, maybe connected to a certain person or people. And so archaeological digs might need to be done before you do any further work on the place. And then that significance can be worked out. Beyond that, there are kind of two more, really. One is the social significance of the place. And this could be a variety of things. So if it was a church, it would have a religious significance, right? That people come and worship there. It might have a commemorative significance. So people associate it with a particular battle which they commemorate every year. So I know up in this part of the world, the Battle of Flodden is commemorated every year, which was a bloody battle between England and Scotland in the 1500s. You could also have a more community-based significance to that place. So perhaps it's it's a meeting place for cultural and communal activities. It's got a social significance in that people find friendships there, and certainly through volunteering at historic sites, many people find friendships and social networks. There's also an economic and environmental significance, and these aren't typically mentioned in Historic England's list, but these would be two further significances, right? And I think that they are increasingly important in governmental strategy. And so what I think that the Pendragon Foundation is trying to do is really say, okay, our world, to sound a bit like the Lord of the Rings, the world is changing, and castles have been maintained in a certain way for the last 50 to 100 years. But that way is failing castles now. It's not maintaining them anymore. And so we need to think of new ways of supporting their preservation, and that might involve enhancing their historic and architectural significance, but it may also involve adding new significances to them so that they can generate an income that goes back into supporting the place. And that, to us, is integrating it into community life, whether that be a rural community or an urban community. And each of those is going to have its own interests and businesses and culture. And so working with that rather than against it is going to be vital to saving these castles. So with that in mind, the last few months has been absolutely spectacular. We have been so pleased with the level of support that you have shown the Pendragon Foundation. We launched publicly in September. We now have towards 30 volunteers working on the project, and these range through a whole different set of aspects of what we're about. The focus of the organization is becoming more refined. We set off with this grand ambition to restore castles, and that is very much what we're trying to do. We're now getting a better understanding of how to go about that. We're getting in to our team people with experience and expertise in heritage restoration, and with them we're now able to kind of work out, okay, this is how you go about the different stages you need to complete to achieve this project. So we have a clearer sense of what we're trying to do, how we're going to do it, and what we need to fulfill it. And so we're in that phase of refining that vision and plan, the operation, as it were. And that is going to be a big part of next year, really getting that ready so that when the right castle comes along, we can actually do this, and we really will be able to do it. I'm really encouraged by the development of this side of what we're doing. We've got a serious understanding of the challenges and how to overcome them and how to make the best of the situation that we've got. So there's a real process here being developed that's going to help us deliver a restored castle. But alongside that, we're also doing a lot of other aspects which are going to help feed into the restoration of a castle and its ongoing life after its restoration that we're beginning now. And one of these things is education. We really believe that highlighting castles and their attendant cultures and spreading our joy and love and knowledge about them with more people, getting people interested in them and understanding their history and heritage is so vitally important, not just for Pendragon, but actually for everybody in this country and abroad, to really know where they come from and the significance of it and let it be a part of their lives. And so we've been running this YouTube channel or Twitter channel, if you're watching on Twitter, for the last few months. We've been producing videos to do with castles and discussing various aspects of their history, trying to explore them in different ways. And that's just going to ramp up next year. We have different outlets that are going to really kick off next year. We're going to have another installment of the magazine, which was a great success in the autumn. Really excited about that. Actually, today I was just writing something that's going to appear in there. And we're going to have one or two other things which are going to launch next year as part of that educational aspect of Pendragon, which it's really, really vital that we do have that knowledge getting out there, because if people know about castles and are excited by them, they're more likely to support restoring them. So it's really a big part of the success of what we're doing is going to depend on that. We're also doing, we're going to be doing some in real life events, and these are going to be a mixture of things, and I can't say too much about them yet because they're not quite ready to release to the world, but some of them are going to be more kind of public facing and things to enjoy. Other things are going to be more practical and hands-on in terms of castles and so on. So that is going to be a big step forward for us. That we're really committed as an organization that this isn't just something that happens online. That actually we need to be doing in real life stuff and helping castles, even if it's going to be a while till we own one of our own to restore. But in the meantime, we can actually go and help other castles with their efforts to preserve and maintain and grow the maintenance of their castles. So that's something that we're getting involved in. We're building those networks, we're building those relationships with other castle preservation organizations and individuals who have been doing this a lot longer than us. And that's really exciting. And that should help us in the long term. We hope to help them. We're hoping to bring our volunteers, our knowledge, our people, and their experiences to help these great organizations who are doing fantastic work. But then when we come around to do our own stuff, this should help us too, because they can bring their knowledge, their expertise, and their support to help us. So we won't be doing it alone. And I think that's really important. We're part of a broader movement of people who love castles, who want to see them thrive, and we're kind of slotting into that network, which is very exciting. And as part of that, we're going to have more and more potential relationships like that in the future. So that's really exciting. And I think finally, the thing I want to say is twofold. Firstly, thank you. Thank you for your support, because whether it's been in terms of volunteering or donating your hard-earned money, or in terms of watching our videos or liking, subscribing, retweeting, sharing, every little bit helps. It's a step forward. It's a step forward. If we think of it like besieging a castle, it's a step forward up the ditch. We're coming up the ditch towards the curtain wall. The cat is above us. The arrows are firing down. But every time somebody shares something that we're doing, it helps us take a step forward. Every time you like one of our videos, it helps us. So I am very grateful to you, because we are facing a monumental challenge, one that I have full confidence that we, with your support, can achieve. So, but it is a real challenge. And so just the level of support that you and so many people have shown for our organization has meant a lot. So I would, not just in terms of the practical results, but also just for the morale of the volunteers and the people who are running this, to know that we're not alone, and actually many of you believe in what we're trying to do. So I want to say thank you to you. Thank you for your support. And secondly, if there is, moving into 2026, if you think that there's something that you would like to do for Pendragon, if you feel this is a moment where you can contribute time and energy to supporting our efforts, whether you live in this country or elsewhere, we would welcome your support, and we would welcome you as part of our team. And I would just ask you, email pendragonvolunteering@gmail.com and have a conversation with our team. They'll chat to you about your interests, your experience, your expertise, your knowledge, and work out where you might best fit within our organization and our efforts to restore castles. So let's have a quick look at what people have said in this video, in the chat, I mean. And first, I just want to thank Byron Brand Stepwise for 10 euros. Have a blessed new year. Thank you, sir. That's very, very kind of you, and I really appreciate it. I think that's on my own channel, but I will forward that 10 euros to the Pendragon Foundation. So thank you, sir. We've had quite a number of posts today. So Rong Tao Wu 7210. Nathan Hood, are there cases of castles that function mainly as an industrial complex the way that Isengard or an early Roman fabricates did? I don't know for certain the answer to that question. I think, a number of castles. So if we go back to here, this area here behind the Deeping Wall, in most castles, the wards would have buildings within them, and there would be a lot of industrial buildings, various like blacksmiths, woodworkers, weapon makers, etc. So this area would have been a kind of industrial area, really. And this is true of a lot of castles, the outer wards, having these sorts of equipment within them, these shops, workshops, and so on. So whether or not they're primarily that, I don't know. I've not come across that, because typically they're the seat of a lord or a royal residence, right? So they're really for the nobility to control the territory around the castle or some strategic point and act as a place they can retreat to and defend themselves if they're under attack. So I've not come across that. But I'm interested to have a look and find out. And yes, thank you for your question, and a happy new year to you yourself. And let's go back to here. Good to see so many good friends in the chat. Sino Lit, who is also a member of Pendragon. Hello, sir. Hope you are doing well. Good evening. Edward III launched from Portchester Castle to land in France for the campaign that ended in the Battle of Crécy. I did not know that, and I'm going to have to read up on Portchester Castle now. Thank you so much, friend. Good to see that. Ragplay is a good friend of the channel. Very big on knowing the lore of Lord of the Rings. He writes, the Rohirrim would need to reform their cavalry into a unit of dragoons, mounted archers that dismount to harass and hop back on their horses to take flight. That's if they were doing this harassing campaign and ambushing them. And I think, yeah, that would be right. It's not something that they've got a lot of, but they do seem to have some mounted archers. So they might be able to do this and pull this off. And I think, you know, given the circumstances, they probably would need to learn that pretty quickly. Because horse archers are very effective against infantry, especially on the move, that we're talking about with the Uruk-hai. They would be on the move. So if you've got them getting peppered constantly with arrows, then you're going to get somewhere. So yeah, so they would need to do that. As to Dunharrow, there would need to be a water source up there for them to hold out. Absolutely, that's perhaps even more important than the stores. There's no well at the top. They're gonna die of thirst. So there needs to be something there. North Huga, hello, sir. Hope you're doing well. The Uruks would be exhausted after the long, unsteady climb. Agree, that's the strategic strength of Dunharrow, that it is a choke point, high elevation, really hard to climb up, something that's going to be difficult to take. But as Ragblazers has suggested, if there's not water, if it's not food, it's not going to work. So yeah, maybe my plan is not so great after all. I like it though. I think there's something to it. Thank you very much, and Richard Phillips, just thank you for your message. Thanks for tuning in. Well, it doesn't seem that there's any more questions. We'll give it a minute or so in case there is. But I just want to wish you all a very happy new year, wherever you are. For us in the UK, it's tomorrow in about 24 hours or so. I'm really looking forward to 2026. I think for Pendragon, it's going to be a really exciting year with lots going on and real steps forward in achieving our ambitions. I think as well that for many folks, 2025 has been a rather hard and depressing year, and so I'm hopeful that going into 2026 there is new light and a chance to recuperate and sally forth once more. And yes, I wish that to you and your families. Well, thank you very much, friends, and thank you for tuning in. Please leave your comments below. I do read them all, and I look forward to catching up with you in 2026. God bless you all. Bye for now. Goodbye.